Hi, everyone, and welcome back to episode one of Experimenting with Existence, a series where I take a closer look at some of my non-philosophy related interests. And in this episode one, we're taking a closer look at strategy board games. Now, in this final part of the episode, part 8, we're going to discuss my experience in the UMKC Entrepreneurship Scholars Program. So much like part 7, part 8 here, this final part, it's going to be a lot shorter, at least relatively speaking, compared to the first 6 parts. And we're not going to, divvy it up into different sections or anything like that. Instead, I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in and start discussing, what my experience in the program was like. Beginning with, so go ahead and moving along here, beginning with my introduction to the program, how it was I came to learn about the program. And that was so I guess I should add the same disclaimer as I did the previous 2 parts, right? This is also going way back, right? We're going back a decade to 2013, as was the case with the previous 2 parts, right? The things I'm relaying here, the events that happened, my memory with respect to said events, right? We're dealing with a time that was at least a decade ago. So keep that in mind. But again, so going back to 2013, how did I learn about the program? What is the program, et cetera? Well, a friend of mine, who actually was a neighbor of mine as well at the time, clued me in on the program. Before he had mentioned it, I really had no idea about the program. And he just happened to mention it in casual correspondence. He knew that I was, liked designing strategy board games. He had played a few of mine. He was familiar with, how passionate I was about the board games and so on. And so he was familiar with this program as well, which is basically a program through University of Missouri, Kansas City, where it's geared, as the name implies, right, Entrepreneurship Scholars Program. It's geared towards entrepreneurs who are trying to make their way in the daunting business world that's out there. And so the program incorporates, many experts, so to speak, many people who have been there, done that in a whole slew of various fields. And that's actually one thing that I really enjoyed about the program was how much variety was on offer, because we got together, I want to say every week or 2 weeks on the weekend would be our regular meetings, and they'd have different presentations and different things going on. And so not only were the students geared towards different ideas and, businesses and so on, but so too were the experts or the people who have been there and done that. They came from all different walks of life and had all sorts of different ideas and were successful in all kinds of different ways. So I did like that aspect of the program. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself there. So how did I come about learning about the program? I was familiar with the school, University of Missouri, Kansas City, but I wasn't familiar with the particular program. Again, this friend of mine who was familiar with the program and myself, I think he actually was in the law program maybe at that school, was how he came about finding out about the Entrepreneurship Scholars Program. And so he relayed that to me. He said, "Hey, this might be a good fit for you. What do you have to lose?" Really encouraged me to go ahead and apply, which I eventually did. So I remember really, the process itself for applying wasn't that daunting, other than I do remember having to submit what was called an idea summary, which turned out to be like 6 pages, which was like a pitch that I had, what I had in mind, what I hoped to gain from the program, and the ways I thought the program could help me out, and how I'd be beneficial to the program as well. And that ended up, I ended up being admitted into the program thanks in part to that idea summary. Which, by the way, so what did I hope to get out of the program? Well, you got to remember, again, having gone through the Milwaukee Rio Grande Games Design Contest that occurred in 2010, in part 6, we talked about that, and having then gone through, interactions with the publisher, right? I was looking for maybe other routes or other avenues through which I might come to become a successful, if you will, board game designer. In other words, by that, become well known enough where then maybe major publishers would, another route by which I could become well known and have major publishers interested in my games, because it's a hard, arduous process, and not only maybe finding another route to appeal to them, but maybe just going about it a completely different route, right? At this point, so the whole point in alluding to those other experiences was that I was ready to try to go about it in a different way if need be. Right? I just wanted to make sure I had explored all options, and like I said, this friend of mine included me in on this entrepreneurship scholars program. And I thought, what do I have to lose by entering the program and seeing maybe what other avenues are on offer or are available to me to try to get my product. And again, I'm going to start talking in businessy terms because that's kind of what the program is all about. But how can I get my product to the consumer? Are there these alternative routes? And what I ended up doing, and so I mentioned all this, and then I thought the program would be a good fit because it would, maybe open up different avenues to me in terms of making this dream of becoming more established in the board game industry a reality. So I mentioned all of this, right, and gave my pitch and the idea summary, and ultimately, then, like I said, that was, uh, you know, I was accepted, and that really was. And the whole point here was that was what I was hoping to glean from the program, right? Because I was ready. It was kind of looking back now. It was almost like a last ditch effort to give this a shot at the time. I knew I had kids. At this point, our third was born, and I knew my kids were getting older and were going to require more and more of my time, and the time I had to invest and devote to, not only designing new strategy games, but trying to make something of the ones I'd already designed. That's going to become less and less and less available right at that time. And so this, in a way, I think was kind of a last. And so that was again my impetus for, or how I came to know or learn about the program, and then my impetus for actually applying, as indicated in the idea summary that I had to submit to the program itself. I guess I wanted to mention kind of how, I have an interesting background in the sense that, as will become clear, and as I've already mentioned several times in various parts, I'm not really a salesperson. I don't get into the business world. It never has really interested me. But at the same time, I have an interesting background in the sense that I was exposed to that very early on, and was immersed in it for a long time growing up. And maybe it makes sense that I don't like it now. I guess I was kind of thinking about this too. You grow up, and your father or mother or both have a certain business, right? And you become, by necessity, right, immersed in that. Oftentimes, we either then end up growing up and doing the exact same thing, taking over the family business maybe, or we, as was my case, in the case for me, as was the case for me, wanting nothing to do with it and sort of steering away from it at all costs. And so think of like growing up as I did, going to these various coin shows and helping my dad out with his business, right? That's the business world. I did this all the time growing up. There were great things that came from it. Don't get me wrong. Lots of travel to lots of different places. I've alluded to that before and in various videos of mine. But, I did, I guess, kind of develop this sense that, hey, this isn't for me. When I get older, when I grow up, I don't want to try to sell stuff. But I did want to acknowledge, so of course, this whole program is geared towards, as I've tried to suggest, right, doing precisely that, right? It's an entrepreneurship scholars program. It's geared towards helping out entrepreneurs, right, and getting established in whatever business they're setting about trying to get established in. I knew that sort of from the get-go that it was kind of at odds with my character in a very deep ingrained way. But nevertheless, I wanted to point out here that in other ways, it sort of jibed with my experience in my past, because I did have, granted, I didn't necessarily enjoy it all, right? I did have this extensive past experience in the business world. So I was exposed to a lot of different elements of the business world, having to maintain a positive, image and relations with the customer, no matter how you might be feeling otherwise, right? I had to answer phones in certain ways, and no matter how I was feeling, like I said, at these various coin shows, have to present myself in a certain way. So again, I think in part, the philosopher is concerned with the truth and reality and how things are, and what sort of rubs me the wrong way, and a lot of the businessy sort of relationships and elements and so on, is that you have to present that image, right? You have to present things a certain way, even though it might be completely at odds with your internal reality, for example. But that's all an aside, if you will. But I did want to sort of mention how I have this it's kind of like it does jibe with my personality going into this program, but at the same time, as I kind of intuitively knew, right, it didn't jibe with kind of what I enjoy and what I sort of what my character or personality is geared towards. So the program itself, so once I was accepted, I don't remember, and I tried to dig up, like, I know I have a folder here somewhere filled with, substantial copies of various things and notes and so on, but I couldn't find it. I do have, and I'll go through towards the end here, I have a file on my computer full of all of the various assignments and so on. But I was trying to find, and I couldn't find, again, sort of the hard copies of all those and my various notes and so on. And like a sign I had that I made videos at the time, I'll probably throw some of these in at the end, where, I had a sign, Musil Board Games. That was the name of my venture, ultimately, that I ended up sort of creating through this program. I had a sign that I would put on when I would record videos. I would put that sign up. I can't find that either. But anyway, just wanted to mention that I had that somewhere. All that stuff's lying around here somewhere. But I'll show you guys, as I mentioned later, some of the files via the computer again later. But just wanted to mention, so I can't remember the specifics in terms of how often we met, but it was fairly frequently. It was back in 2013, and I want to say, for the most part, it was like the whole spring, and it wasn't like every day. I want to say it was like maybe once a week or maybe once every other week. I don't remember whether it seems that it was either weekly or bi-weekly, but for the whole sort of semester or spring. And then some of it carried over, some presentations and so on through the summer, and then also it might have been spring through summer, the program itself, and then some of it carried on into August and into the fall as well. So that's kind of like how long or what sort of parameters we're talking about in terms of the schedule and how long the program lasted. It did entail a lot of work. I mean, it wasn't long in terms of how many years. It was just like, I completed the program within a year, but it was a lot of work in terms of the assignments. And I don't know that everybody necessarily put in as much work. One of the things I kind of gleaned from some of the instructors I was working with is that maybe I was spending too much time on some of these assignments. But it definitely, I definitely poured a lot of time into completing these assignments. There were a whole slew of various assignments, which ultimately built up to each student, right, each scholar, building a business plan, right? So they were, in some sense, all the assignments were, most of the assignments anyway, were components that would ultimately comprise the business plan in the end, which was ultimately, there were kind of like two main things that I remember being the upshots of the program, or you pass, or how you would, I guess, complete it. And I did get a certificate and everything, but you would build this business plan, right? And this is a long, substantial document, which I'll probably show you at the end. And then you also have to give kind of like, I don't remember the gist of it, but this is what was in August. It was like a conference filled with hundreds of people in this conference hall, and every one of us in the program had like 30 seconds to go up and at the podium give basically an elevator pitch to everyone, and then sort of it was kind of a mingle sort of deal for the rest of the day. But that was then also how kind of the program wrapped up in general. Those are the two things that I remember kind of being the indicators that you completed the program, right? You went to that conference, and then you finished ultimately a business plan. But in the process, then we would get together. It would be, I think it was on Saturdays, all morning were the sessions, and they were interesting. I enjoyed the learning process, learning about. Now, I had experience, as I mentioned, in all sorts of respects with regard to the business world, but a lot of this was still new to me, and hearing about from experts, people who had been there and done that in these various fields, kind of learning from them how to best go about things and how they failed. And it was just really cool, actually, how they incorporated all these different people from these variety of different fields who were willing to these were all volunteers, share not only their time, but their history and their failings and so on. Again, I really appreciated that aspect of the program. But you're encountering and you are investing your time, is how I started here. You're investing your time, every weekend or every other weekend, going to this program. And so I would go to the campus and go every weekend or every other weekend. And then you would have just, like any other academic program, there was a schedule and with certain dates where the certain assignments had to be submitted. And, I learned a lot building ultimately this business plan and through all these various individual assignments. I learned a lot about, how the business world works. Maybe learned a little bit more about why I didn't want to really get involved in it ultimately. But did all sorts of things. Had to complete all sorts of assignments that I had no idea about before the program. Value analysis, customer analysis, all sorts of things like that. Competitor analysis, executive summary, a marketing plan, and much, much more. Right. And again, the idea being all of these assignments ultimately culminating in that final product of a business plan. I mentioned how, again, one of the other things that you're sort of the pinnacle or the end goal of the program was that conference where you had all sorts of people in the crowd, including some venture capitalists, people who are looking to invest, which was cool too, right? Invest in various ideas. So there really was something at stake. So I mentioned how, we all did that, all the scholars in the program. That's the thing that we did at the very end. And so that was one way and sort of one example of where I would have to talk in front of big crowds. And that was just one instance. The program did entail several times where you would have to give your pitch, right, your spiel, try to sell your product in front of lots of people you had just met, because this is true of the business world, right? There's so many ideas out there and only such little time for the people that matter. A lot of the program entailed sort of fine-tuning that pitch, right, and getting down to the real substance and trying to get to that as quickly as possible, right? Getting your elevator pitch as finely tuned as possible. So yeah, all sorts of assignments, fascinating sort of learning process involved, right? Getting to know the various nuances of the business world. I had known about, for example, running spreadsheets with, of course, I forget the term for all your different revenue streams. Maybe that's it, right? And actually doing a budget via a spreadsheet, and you had to do all that in the program. They taught you all of that. That entailed, multiple. I went through and looked. It was like 6 different versions to finally get it just right. And learning how that worked, balancing the budget, so to speak, for a complex business which has all these various revenue streams. Had to do all sorts of different various assignments, and like I mentioned as well, give so there's that aspect, right? Becoming more familiar with all the various parts of the business world and the document side of it, but then also sort of training. A lot of the assignments were meant or intended to help train us to get comfortable in the social respects of the business world and nailing that pitch down, right, to where it's super polished, gets to the point in as little time as possible. So those, again, were some of the upshots, some of the things that the assignments were geared towards. As part of the process of the program, I ended up buying a website, I guess, or a URL, or I don't know all the terms involved here, but basically running a website called musilboardgames.com. It's no longer up and running. I don't run it anymore, but for several years as a result of this program, I did. I had it up and running again. That's how Gozer Games ended up, right? Matthew Duhan, the subject of part 7 of this episode, how he was able to, take a look at all my various designs and learn learn more about the game, see pictures, see videos, etc. So I did design, again, maintain a website for as part of the program. And I mentioned Musil Board Games is what I end up calling my venture, and so musilboardgames.com was the name of the website. I had all kinds of business cards created. There were just so many different facets of this program. So what I ended up ultimately, I went on Board Game Geek and tried to solicit feedback from fellow geeks on Board Game Geek as part of various assignments here, trying to figure out again what maybe my best options are other than going through major publishers, right? What about the self-publishing route? What about, and this is kind of where I ultimately started leaning, what about maybe electronic or on the web, providing my games electronically? And I've talked about how some of my games actually seem like they would be much better implemented actually online or electronically. For example, Fantasy Football, the board game, being able to do all of that, just setting up your teams and your playbooks and so on, just online. That would be so much quicker than actually having to do it by hand. Now, I like the allure of the physical copy as well, but I can definitely see the appeal of online implementation as well, or some sort of electronic version. And that's really kind of the route I started leaning towards. And so when I completed all these assignments and ultimately made the business plan, that was very much a part of the plan, was maintaining and running some sort of online platform where my designs then would be available. I toyed around with this is where the surveys on Board Game Geek came in. I toyed around with, how to best go about that. Would you charge like a monthly fee to play games unlimited, or would you, charge by game, so on and so forth. But just to give you an idea, that's kind of where I started to lean. I wanted to provide some sort of online website where, again, people could come and play my games, see how they're, various videos provided, see how to play them, then play the games for some sort of fee. I don't like advertisements. If you've watched any of my other videos, that. And so I would try to avoid that. But, obviously it's a venture, trying to make money somehow, right? So, again, how would you do that? That was all part of the business plan. So, I wrestled with various ideas, again, like a subscription sort of plan. And that's where I also entertained, again, the survey and the feedback from the Board Game Geek fellow geeks. So that was all part of the process, what was involved in the UMKC program, things I did in the process, and so on. Ultimately, though, having completed all of it, there were some. Actually, I didn't even think about this, but some of the venture capitalists that came to the conference at the end, did express interest in some of my designs. I actually met with one of them at a library, brought some designs and so on, discussed things with her, but nothing ultimately ended up coming from that as well. So it was much like my experience working directly with the publisher as described in part 7, and much like my ultimate takeaway from the Rio Grande Games Design Contest that I discussed in part 6. My experience in the program, the ultimate upshot, had a very similar feel as those did. There was a lot of positives I took away from it, but in the end, I didn't ultimately, I don't have a website where you can go and play my games. None of my games, you can't go and buy a published version of my games at the moment. You can come over to my house and play one of my many, many prototypes, right? But ultimately, there's a sense of disappointment that resulted, now, fast forward a decade, right? Nothing ultimately came of it. Do I regret any of the experiences? No, absolutely not. And in particular, the Scholars Program here, Entrepreneurship Scholars Program, absolutely not. There were so many positives that came from the experience, which I've alluded to not only in this video, but in previous videos, right? Fantasy Basketball, the board game, one of my designs, was a result of meeting with one of the, what do they call them? I forgot the label they had for the mentors is what they call them. For every student in the program is connected with 2 mentors who, they tried to match you up with someone who's relatively close to your idea or what you're pitching. But again, one of my Fantasy Basketball, the board game, was born out of discussions with one of my mentors who suggested, I like that Fantasy Football, the board game, but man, I'm more of a basketball fan. Boom, the light switch was was turned on, and that was the inspiration for one of my games. So obviously, lots of positives to that I had from the experience, much like entering the Milwaukee contest and interacting with the Gozer Games and the publisher. But there is ultimately nevertheless, that sense of, man, I really wish it's just so close, so many times, right? And what's happened since then? Have I made any significant efforts? No. Right? I alluded to kind of how I thought, thinking back and reflecting on this experience. I think that I kind of knew in the back of my mind this is probably my last chance to make something happen at this point in my life. And so fast forward a decade, I have 4 kids now who we have things going on every night, for all 4 of them. So once they graduate, right, and become a little older, and we're not driving them around everywhere and is involved in their everyday activities, that will open up more time for me. Then I can definitely see myself then revisiting my attempts to ultimately get some of my games published. And the reality is, and I've learned and appreciated this more and more throughout the years, I don't really necessarily, it's not one of my top goals to be a board game, to be published ultimately in the board game world. I would enjoy it. It would be awesome in some sense, right? But it's not something I have to have. And so maybe I think that's maybe changed over the years. Like maybe I had a much stronger desire for that maybe a decade ago. But over the years, it would be awesome. It would be great if I was funded, right? And this was another revenue stream for me, right? Where I could then invest even more time because I was getting paid to do so. It would be great. I would appreciate that. But, philosophy is still, that's never going to go away. That's always really who I am at the deepest level. And so, I'm always going to have that as a passion. That's always going to be driving me, regardless of what transpires in the strategy board game world. Now, having said that, again, there's a reason why I was disappointed having experienced some of these things, and that's because I would appreciate and like to be ultimately, have some games published and to be established, if you will, in the board game world. I would appreciate some of the opportunities that might afford, right? And working with other designers and publishers and being able to, as I mentioned earlier, spend more time, designing games, which I do thoroughly enjoy, even to this point, up to this day, despite how little time I seem to be able to devote to it, given the kids and our various practical commitments. Blah, 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 blah. Is that all I have to say? So the upshot, I guess I've already hinted at this, but again, bittersweet, sort of good and bad, coming from the UMKC Entrepreneurship Scholars Program. The one thing that I definitely had reinforced that I came to appreciate, and it was really dawning on me as the program came to a close towards the end, is that I really don't have the salesman businessy mentality. Not to say that I'm not any good at it, that I don't think I could be good at it if I devoted time to it. It's just not something I'm interested in. It's not who I am. I've mentioned this in previous parts of this episode, right? I'm much more the creative type. I would much rather be spending my time creating, designing the games, revising the games, playing the games, than trying to sell the games and market the games. So this UMKC program that definitely reinforced that idea, right? And the upshot of a lot of the experiences I had in the program reinforced that notion within me. Again, not that I wouldn't have had, say, the website become successful, or had I, met with better success in terms of some of the venture capitalists I spoke to. That's not to say I wouldn't have fully dove in and invested as much time as necessary, trying to be as successful as possible via those, by way of those routes and those opportunities. But again, I did learn that it's best from my perspective to try to minimize my involvement in the sales businessy world, right? It's better for me to leave that to others who are interested in and probably better at doing that sort of thing. Anyway, so is that it? I think for the most part, that's it. I'm going to turn to, before I completely conclude the episode and this final part, part 8, I'm going to turn to a closer look at some of those assignments I referenced, some of the things I had to do for the Entrepreneurship Scholars Program at UMKC, and maybe conclude with some glances back at some old school videos that include the Musil board game sign. So let's go ahead and do that. And here we go. You're basically going to get an alphabetical tour of these assignments. I just went through my file folder on my computer, and they're essentially in alphabetical order, more or less. And we're starting here with the competitor analysis. So how do I stand out from all the competitors out there? I had to put this together, over time, doing many revisions, and then ended up presenting many of my presentations in front of, a big group of people. And here we have our My Business Model canvas. It's basically just like a snapshot of the venture at a glance. And then next we have a customer analysis, so a in-depth breakdown of who I had in mind, who my venture was geared towards in terms of selling my games. Specifically, who was the target audience or target audiences. And so here you have an in-depth sort of exploration of those particular markets and how I think more or less I can satisfy the customers. There's a few of the assignments that kind of get into that, this sort of idea. Well, how can I fulfill something they need? There were a few of these assignments that were geared towards that. Here we have the executive summary. So it's, again, kind of a snapshot version of the business plan, if you will. So again, all of these assignments were put together and ultimately culminated in a business plan. And here's the marketing plan. So all these basic components, all these individual assignments then were put together for the business plan at the end of the program. This is the operations plan. How was the venture going to actually operate? Who are the employees? Who's going to do what, etc. And we will end here with a value analysis. Again, how am I going to offer value to my customers? Wrapping up, I plan on doing a hiking episode next, which I'm really looking forward to. I have a lot of material for that already. And I'll leave you now and turn to a couple of board game related blasts from the past.
I'm Zach Musil. And we're here with Musil Board Games. And tonight we're going to unbox King of Tokyo.
Hi, I'm Dad.
Hi, I'm Jack, and welcome to episode 7 of Jack and Dad Reviews, where we review games that do not have many reviews. And we have a guest of honor tonight. And
What's her name?
yeah, what's my name?
Abby.
Say guest of honor.